The iron shackles around Ophelia's wrists bit into her skin as she stood on the auction block in Wichita, Kansas, her stepmother's cold eyes watching from the crowd with satisfaction that made Ophelia's stomach turn. It was the summer of 1872, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street where men gathered to bid on goods, livestock, and apparently desperate young women whose families no longer wanted them. She had turned 18 just 3 weeks ago, and her stepmother had wasted no time declaring her a burden that needed to be sold to the highest bidder for household service, though everyone knew what that really meant in these parts. Ophelia's father had died 2 winters back, leaving her alone with a woman who had never shown her an ounce of kindness. Margaret Hartley had married her father for his small farm, and once he was gone, she'd made it clear that Ophelia was nothing more than another mouth to feed. The girl had tried to make herself useful, working from dawn until long past dark, but nothing was ever enough. Margaret had debts, and Ophelia was the easiest way to settle them. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining his shirt, droned on about her qualities as if she were a horse. Strong back, good teeth, can cook and clean. Starting bid at $50. Ophelia kept her eyes down, her long dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. She wore the only decent dress she owned, a faded blue cotton thing that had belonged to her real mother. The memory of her mother was dim now, just flashes of warmth and gentle songs. A woman who had died bringing Ophelia's baby brother into the world, a brother who had followed their mother into death within days. Men in the crowd called out numbers, their voices blending together into a nauseating chorus. She recognized some of them, ranch hands and shopkeepers from around Wichita, men who looked at her with hunger that made her want to disappear. The bidding climbed higher, and Ophelia felt her last shred of hope crumbling. She would belong to one of these men by day's end, would be trapped in whatever fate they chose for her. Then a voice cut through the crowd, deep and clear. $200. The other bidders fell silent. Ophelia lifted her head slightly, trying to see who had spoken. The crowd parted reluctantly, and a man stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with long dark hair tied back and a thick beard. He wore buckskin clothing and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time in the wilderness than in towns. His eyes were a startling blue, and when they met hers, she saw something unexpected: kindness. The auctioneer sputtered. 200. Well, that's quite generous, Mr. Zimmerman. Anyone want to go higher? The crowd muttered, but no one challenged the bid. The mountain man, Zimmerman, had a reputation in these parts. He came down from his cabin in the Flint Hills only a few times a year to trade furs and buy supplies. He was known to be fair but not a man to cross. More importantly, he had ready cash, which most of the other bidders did not. Going once, going twice sold to Wyatt Zimmerman for $200. Wyatt stepped onto the platform and unlocked the shackles himself, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly. Ophelia rubbed her sore wrists and nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. We have a long journey ahead." He handed the money to the auctioneer without looking at him, then guided Ophelia down from the platform with a hand at her elbow. The crowd watched them with various expressions of curiosity and disappointment. Ophelia caught sight of her stepmother collecting the money from the auctioneer, not even glancing in her direction. That final rejection hurt more than she wanted to admit. Wyatt led her to where 2 horses waited, a large bay stallion and a smaller chestnut mare. He helped her onto the mare without ceremony, then mounted his own horse. Within minutes, they were riding out of Wichita, leaving the town and everything Ophelia had ever known behind. They rode in silence for over an hour, heading northeast toward the rolling hills. Ophelia kept expecting him to say something, to make demands or explain what he wanted from her, but he simply rode steadily onward. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, he spoke. "There's a creek up ahead. We'll water the horses and rest a bit." The creek was a welcome sight, a ribbon of clear water cutting through the prairie. Wyatt dismounted and helped Ophelia down, then led the horses to drink. She stood awkwardly, uncertain what to do with herself. "You must have questions," Wyatt said, not looking at her as he loosened his horse's girth. "I have many questions, sir. Wyatt, just call me Wyatt." He turned to face her then, his expression serious. "I'm not going to hurt you, Ophelia. That's not why I bought you." She blinked in surprise. "You know my name," the auctioneer said it. "I was listening." He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her. "Drink. You look parched." The water was cool and sweet. Ophelia hadn't realized how thirsty she was until she started drinking. When she lowered the canteen, Wyatt was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why did you buy me then?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I lost my wife and daughter 5 years ago. Cholera. I moved up into the hills after that, couldn't stand being around people anymore. But I've been thinking lately that hiding from life isn't the same as living it." He met her eyes again. "I saw you standing there looking lost and scared, and something in me just knew I couldn't let any of those other men take you. You reminded me of my Clara, my daughter. She would have been about your age now." Ophelia's throat tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for yours." "I could see it in your eyes, that kind of grief. You've lost people too." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Here's what I'm offering," Wyatt said, his voice gentle but firm. "I have a cabin in the hills about 2 days' ride from here. It's simple but comfortable. You can stay there, help with the cooking and such if you want, but I'm not asking you to be a servant. I'm offering you a place to be safe, to figure out what you want from life. When you're ready to leave, whenever that is, I'll take you wherever you want to go and give you enough money to start over proper." Ophelia stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that? Just let me stay and then leave if I want?" "I would. I give you my word, and my word means something." He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" She looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, the hand of a man who worked hard and lived honestly. Slowly she reached out and shook it. "We have an agreement." A small smile crossed Wyatt's face, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his features, making him look younger and less severe. "Good. We should keep moving if we want to make it to the way station before full dark. Old friend of mine runs it, and his wife makes the best stew you've ever tasted." They rode until the stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The way station was a sturdy building with a barn and corral, lamplight spilling welcomingly from its windows. A man emerged as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a grin when he recognized Wyatt. "Wyatt Zimmerman. Haven't seen you in near 6 months." The man's eyes shifted to Ophelia with undisguised curiosity. "Good to see you, Tom. This is Ophelia. We need lodging for the night if you have room." Tom's wife, a plump woman named Sarah, fussed over Ophelia immediately, showing her to a small but clean room and bringing her warm water to wash with. "You look exhausted, dear. Rest up and come down when you're ready. Supper will be waiting." The kindness was overwhelming after so many months of her stepmother's cruelty. Ophelia found herself blinking back tears as she washed her face and tried to make herself presentable. When she came down to the main room, Wyatt was seated at a long table with Tom, the two men deep in conversation about fur prices and weather predictions. They made room for her, and Sarah brought out bowls of rich beef stew with fresh bread. "So how do you two know each other?" Sarah asked with the friendly nosiness of someone who saw few visitors. Wyatt glanced at Ophelia, giving her the choice of how to answer. She appreciated that small gesture of respect. "We just met today," she said quietly. "Wyatt is giving me a place to stay." Sarah's eyebrows rose, but she was too polite to pry further. Instead, she launched into stories about the local area, filling the meal with cheerful chatter that required little response. Ophelia was grateful. She was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. After supper, Wyatt walked her to her room. "Get some rest. We'll leave at first light. Tomorrow's ride will be longer." "Wyatt." She turned to face him in the dim hallway. "Thank you for everything." His expression softened. "You don't need to thank me, Ophelia. Just try to get some sleep." She slept better than she had in months, despite being in a strange place. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the first stirring of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They left as promised at first light, after a hearty breakfast that Sarah insisted they eat. The landscape gradually changed as they rode, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills covered in tall grass that rippled like waves in the wind. Wyatt pointed out landmarks and wildlife, his voice warm when he talked about the land he clearly loved. "See those trees there? That's where a spring comes up, coldest, clearest water you'll ever taste. And over that rise, there's a meadow where wildflowers grow so thick in spring you can't see the ground." Ophelia found herself relaxing in his presence. He never pressed too close, never made her feel threatened or uncomfortable. When they stopped to rest the horses, he treated her with the same easy courtesy he showed everyone, asking her opinion and listening when she spoke. "Did you always live in Wichita?" he asked as they shared dried meat and hardtack for lunch. "All my life. My father had a farm about 5 miles outside town, small place just enough to get by." She paused, then continued. "He was a good man, kind. My mother died when I was small, and he raised me by himself for years before he married Margaret, your stepmother." "Yes, I think he was lonely. I was maybe 10 when they married. She seemed nice enough at first, but after the wedding she changed. Or maybe she just stopped pretending." Ophelia looked down at her hands. "Father didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to see it. When he died, she made it clear I wasn't wanted." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "What she did was wrong, selling you like that. I don't think anyone would have stopped her. The law doesn't care much about women's troubles, especially when there's no money involved. The law should care. People should care." He stood, brushing dust from his pants. "But you're away from her now. She can't hurt you anymore." They reached Wyatt's cabin as the sun was setting on the second day. It sat in a small valley surrounded by hills, built solidly of logs with a stone chimney. A creek ran nearby, and there was a small barn and corral for the horses. It was isolated but beautiful, and Ophelia felt something ease in her chest at the sight of it. "It's not fancy," Wyatt said, swinging down from his horse, "but it's solid and warm." Inside, the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside. The main room held a stone fireplace, a table with chairs and comfortable furniture that looked handmade. A ladder led to a loft, and there was a separate bedroom on the ground floor. Everything was neat and clean, though clearly the home of someone who lived alone. "You'll take the bedroom," Wyatt said, setting her small bag down. "I sleep in the loft usually. There's a root cellar out back, plenty of food stored. Tomorrow I'll show you around proper, but for tonight, let's just get settled." Ophelia explored the bedroom while Wyatt tended to the horses. It had a real bed with a thick mattress, a wardrobe, and a washstand. A window looked out toward the creek. She touched the quilt on the bed, noting the careful stitches. Had Wyatt's wife made it? The thought brought a wave of sadness for this man who had lost so much. Wyatt made supper, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease. He prepared venison steaks with fried potatoes and canned green beans, and Ophelia was surprised by how good it tasted. "You're a better cook than I expected," she said, then blushed. "I'm sorry, that sounded rude." He chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. "No offense taken. A man living alone learns to cook or starves. I prefer not to starve." After supper, they sat by the fire. Wyatt whittled a piece of wood, and Ophelia simply watched the flames, feeling the tension of the past years slowly draining away. "What did you mean," she asked quietly, "when you said you would give me back the childhood I lost?" Wyatt looked up from his whittling. "Did I say that?" "On the ride. You said something about how everyone deserves to have a childhood and I'd clearly missed mine." He was quiet for a moment, then set down his knife and wood. "My Clara, she loved to play. Even when she got older, into her teens, she would still climb trees and wade in the creek and chase butterflies. My wife used to worry it wasn't proper, but I always thought there was time enough for being serious when you're grown. Time enough for hard work and responsibility." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I watched you in Wichita, standing there looking like you'd forgotten how to smile, how to be young. I thought maybe, if you wanted, you could have some of that here. Some time to just be without worrying about what comes next." Tears pricked Ophelia's eyes. "I don't remember the last time I played at anything." "Then maybe it's time to remember." He smiled at her, and she saw genuine warmth in his eyes. "You're safe here, Ophelia. You can do whatever you want, be whoever you want. No one's going to judge you or hurt you." That night, lying in the comfortable bed, Ophelia cried quietly into her pillow. But they weren't entirely tears of sadness. Mixed in was relief and gratitude and the first fragile shoots of healing. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Wyatt showed her around the property, teaching her about the land and the animals. He had chickens that provided eggs, a vegetable garden that needed tending, and he hunted and trapped to supplement their food stores. But he never demanded that she work. Instead, he invited her to join him, making each task feel like an adventure rather than a chore. "Want to check the fish traps?" he'd ask over breakfast. Or, "I'm going to gather some herbs by the creek. Care to come along?" Ophelia found herself saying yes more often than not. She discovered that she enjoyed working alongside Wyatt, listening to his stories about the land and the wildlife. He had a gentle way of teaching, never making her feel stupid when she didn't know something, always patient when she made mistakes. One morning, about a week after her arrival, Wyatt brought out a bow and arrows. "Thought you might like to learn how to shoot." Ophelia stared at the weapon. "I've never done anything like that." "Good time to start then." He demonstrated how to string the bow, how to nock an arrow, how to aim. His hands were steady and sure, and Ophelia found herself watching him more than the target he'd set up. When it was her turn, she was clumsy at first, the string snapping against her forearm and leaving a red mark. Wyatt gently adjusted her stance, showing her how to hold her arm properly. "Like this, see? Keep your elbow straight." His hands on her shoulders were warm through her dress, guiding her into position. Ophelia felt her breath catch, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. She released the arrow and it flew wide, missing the target entirely. "I'm terrible at this." "You're learning. That's different from being terrible." He stepped back, giving her space. "Try again." She practiced until her arms ached, and by the end of the session, she'd actually hit the target twice. Wyatt praised each small success, and Ophelia felt a ridiculous surge of pride. As the weeks passed, Ophelia began to change. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long started to fade. She laughed more easily, smiled more often. Wyatt seemed to take joy in her transformation, finding small ways to delight her. He brought her wildflowers and taught her their names. He showed her how to identify animal tracks and predict the weather from the clouds. He carved her a small flute and taught her to play simple melodies. Sometimes in the evenings he would play his own fiddle, and Ophelia would dance around the cabin feeling lighter than air. "You look happy," he said one evening, watching her spin. "I am happy," she realized with surprise. "I can't remember the last time I felt this way." Summer deepened into autumn, and Ophelia had been with Wyatt for 3 months. The leaves on the trees began to turn gold and red, and there was a crispness in the morning air that spoke of coming winter. Wyatt began preparing for the cold months ahead, cutting extra firewood and checking the cabin's chinking. Ophelia helped, feeling now like a true partner rather than a guest. One afternoon, they were working together to store vegetables in the root cellar. Ophelia was handing down potatoes to Wyatt, who was arranging them in bins below. She lost her footing on the ladder and fell, and Wyatt caught her, his strong arms wrapping around her to break her fall. They stood there for a moment, pressed close together in the dim cellar. Ophelia could feel his heart beating against her back, could smell the clean scent of him mixed with wood smoke and pine. When he gently set her on her feet and turned her to face him, his eyes were dark with concern. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. You caught me." She looked up at him, and something shifted in the air between them. For the first time, she truly saw him not as her rescuer or protector, but as a man. A good, kind, handsome man who made her heart race. Wyatt seemed to see the change in her expression. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Ophelia," he said softly. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. But Wyatt stepped back, his hand dropping to his side. "We should finish up here," he said, his voice rough. "It'll be dark soon." Ophelia felt a mix of disappointment and confusion, but she nodded and returned to her task. They worked in silence, but the comfortable ease between them had become charged with an awareness that hadn't been there before. That night, Ophelia lay awake thinking. Over the months with Wyatt, her feelings had grown from gratitude to friendship to something deeper. She cared for him in a way that made her chest ache when he smiled, that made her want to reach out and touch him whenever he was near. Was this love? She'd never felt it before, had no experience to compare it to. Upstairs in the loft, Wyatt was having similar thoughts. He'd noticed the change in how Ophelia looked at him, and it stirred feelings he'd thought died with his wife. But Ophelia was young, had her whole life ahead of her. He was 42 years old, scarred by loss and hard living. What could he offer her besides this isolated cabin and a lonely life in the hills? The next morning, there was a new awkwardness between them. Wyatt was quieter than usual, and Ophelia kept catching him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Finally, as they were cleaning up after lunch, she couldn't take it anymore. "Did I do something wrong?" Wyatt looked up from the dish he was washing. "What? No, of course not." "You've been different since yesterday, distant." He set down the dish and dried his hands slowly. "Ophelia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her heart started pounding. "All right. Are you happy here?" "I mean truly happy, not just grateful to be away from your stepmother." "I'm truly happy," she said without hesitation. "This is the best I've felt in years, maybe ever. And if I took you to a town, helped you set up somewhere with people your own age, opportunities for a different kind of life, would you want that?" Ophelia felt a cold fear grip her. "Are you trying to send me away?" "No, I mean, I'm trying to do what's right for you." Wyatt ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "You're 18 years old. You should be going to socials and meeting young men, building a future, not stuck out here with someone old enough to be your father." "You're not my father," Ophelia said firmly. And I don't want to go to socials or meet other men. I want to stay here, with you." Wyatt stared at her. "Ophelia, you don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." She stepped closer to him, her heart racing but her voice steady. "I care about you, Wyatt. Not as a guardian or a friend, although you're both of those things. I care about you the way a woman cares about a man she wants to build a life with. You're too young to know what you want. I'm the same age your wife was when you married her, aren't I?" The shot hit home. She'd found a picture of Wyatt's family tucked in a book, had done the math based on the dates written on the back. "You told me she was 18 when you wed. That was different." "How?" "Because I'm not supposed to have feelings for you. Because you saved me, and that means I can't see you as anything but my rescuer." Ophelia felt tears burning in her eyes. "I know my own heart, Wyatt. These months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me kindness and patience and given me a reason to smile again. You've given me joy and laughter and made me feel safe for the first time since my father died. How can I not love you for that?" Wyatt looked stricken. "Ophelia, if you don't feel the same way, tell me and I'll never speak of it again. But don't send me away because you think it's what I should want. Let me choose for myself." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. Then, slowly, he reached out and cupped her cheek in his large, calloused hand. "I do feel the same way," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been fighting it because it didn't seem right, but I can't deny it anymore. You've brought light back into my life, Ophelia. You've made me remember what it feels like to hope, to want a future instead of just surviving each day. Then, why are we fighting this? Because I want to be sure you're sure. This isn't a life that most women would choose, stuck out here away from everything. And I'm set in my ways, older than you, rough around the edges." Ophelia smiled through her tears. "I don't want most women's lives. I want this life, this place. I want you, Wyatt Zimmerman, rough edges and all." He searched her eyes one more time, then slowly lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of all the tenderness and longing they'd both been holding back. Ophelia's arms came up around his neck, and she kissed him back with all the love in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Ophelia. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on that auction block looking lost and brave all at once. I love you too. So much." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking about what they wanted from life and from each other. Wyatt was insistent that they do things properly. "I'll take you into town. Let the preacher marry us if that's truly what you want. I won't have people saying I took advantage of you." "When?" "Spring. Give us the winter to be sure, to really know each other as courting folks should. If you still want this come spring, we'll marry with all the proper ceremony." Ophelia agreed, though part of her wanted to ride to town that very day. But Wyatt was right. Taking time to be certain was the wise choice, even though her heart already knew its mind. The winter months were unlike anything Ophelia had ever experienced. The first snow fell in November, transforming the landscape into a wonderland of white. Wyatt taught her to snowshoe, and they explored the winter woods together, hand in hand. He showed her how to ice fish on the frozen creek, and how to track animals through the snow in the evenings. They sat close by the fire, Wyatt with his arm around her shoulders as they talked or read aloud to each other. He'd produced a small collection of books, precious treasures that he'd kept from his former life. They read together about far-off places and grand adventures, but Ophelia couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere but right where she was. Wyatt was courting her properly, with all the care and respect she deserved. He brought her small gifts, a hair comb he'd carved from antler, a warm shawl he'd traded for in town, a strand of blue beads that matched her eyes. He told her stories about his life before, about his first wife and daughter, sharing his grief and letting her comfort him. In turn, Ophelia shared her own stories, the good memories of her father and mother, the hard years with her stepmother. They grew closer with each passing day, learning the rhythms of each other's moods and habits. Wyatt discovered that Ophelia sang when she was happy, soft melodies that made the cabin feel like a home. Ophelia learned that Wyatt had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, waking with a gasp in the loft above, and she would call up softly to him until his breathing steadied. One particularly cold night in January, a blizzard raged outside. Wyatt came down from the loft, unable to sleep with the wind howling so fiercely. He found Ophelia already awake, wrapped in a quilt by the fire. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head. "The wind sounds angry." He sat beside her, and she immediately nestled against his side. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm. "Tell me about your wife," Ophelia said quietly. "What was she like?" Wyatt was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer, but finally he spoke. "Her name was Catherine. She was practical and strong, a farmer's daughter who knew how to work hard. We had a good marriage, not passionate maybe, but steady and kind. She gave me Clara, and that was the greatest gift of my life." His voice roughened. "Losing them both, it broke something in me. I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. And now," he looked down at her, his eyes soft, "now I think maybe broken things can be mended, given time and care. You've mended me, Ophelia, made me want to live again instead of just existing." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough beard beneath her fingers. "You've mended me too. I didn't know how broken I was until I started healing." He kissed her then, deeper than before, with more passion. Ophelia responded eagerly, her hands tangling in his hair. When he pulled back, both were flushed and breathing hard. "Spring can't come soon enough," Wyatt said with a rueful smile. Ophelia laughed, feeling warm despite the cold wind outside. "No, it certainly cannot." As winter slowly gave way to spring, preparations for the wedding began. Wyatt rode into Wichita alone. He wouldn't let Ophelia go back to a place that held such bad memories, and arranged everything with the preacher. He also stopped by the general store and bought fabric for a wedding dress, fine white cotton with lace trim that made the shopkeeper raise her eyebrows. "Getting married, Mr. Zimmerman?" "I am, Mrs. Patterson, to the finest woman in Kansas." Word spread quickly through the small town. Some remembered the auction and drew their own conclusions. Others just gossiped about the strange mountain man taking a wife after all these years of solitude. Wyatt didn't care what they thought. He bought what he needed and headed back to his Ophelia. She cried when she saw the fabric, overcome by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "It's beautiful. Not half as beautiful as you'll be wearing it." He kissed her forehead. "Can you sew well enough to make it up, or should I find someone? I can manage. My mother taught me before she died." Ophelia ran her fingers over the soft material. "I'll make something she would have been proud of." She worked on the dress through late March and into April, her stitches careful and precise. Wyatt was building furniture for their shared future, a larger bed for the bedroom, a hope chest for Ophelia's things, a cradle that made her blush and smile. Neither spoke directly about children, but both hoped for them, for a family to fill the cabin with love and laughter. They set the wedding date for the 1st of May, a Sunday when the wildflowers would be blooming and the world would be green and new. The Saturday before, they rode together to Wichita. It felt strange to Ophelia to return after nearly a year away, but with Wyatt beside her, the town had no power to hurt her anymore. They stayed at the boarding house, in separate rooms to maintain propriety for this last night. In the morning, Ophelia dressed in her new gown with the help of the boarding house owner, a kind woman who fussed over her like a mother hen. "You look lovely, dear. Just lovely. Mr. Zimmerman is a lucky man." Ophelia looked at herself in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly, accentuating her figure without being improper. Her dark hair was pinned up with the antler comb Wyatt had made, and she wore the blue beads at her throat. She barely recognized the happy, healthy young woman looking back at her. Was this really the same girl who had stood on the auction block less than a year ago, hopeless and afraid? The church was small but well kept, and Wyatt was waiting at the altar when she arrived. He wore new clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a black vest, and had trimmed his beard. When he saw her walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes grew wet with emotion. They'd invited no guests, wanting this moment to be theirs alone, but the preacher's wife served as witness. The ceremony was simple and traditional. Wyatt's voice was strong and sure when he spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish Ophelia for all the days of his life. Ophelia's voice trembled, but didn't waver as she made the same promises back to him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed her with such tenderness that Ophelia felt tears slip down her cheeks. These were happy tears, joyful tears, tears of gratitude for the unexpected gift of this love. They had a simple meal at the town's only restaurant, then began the journey back to their cabin, their home. Ophelia kept glancing at the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that Wyatt had bought with furs he'd trapped all winter. She was a married woman now, Ophelia Zimmerman, and her heart was so full she thought it might burst. The cabin welcomed them home as the sun was setting. Wyatt swept Ophelia up in his arms and carried her over the threshold, making her laugh and protest that she wasn't a delicate flower. But he insisted, and she loved him all the more for the romantic gesture. Their wedding night was everything Ophelia could have hoped for, gentle and passionate, awkward and perfect all at once. Wyatt was patient with her innocence, showing her the pleasures of married love with careful attention to her comfort. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big new bed, Ophelia's head on Wyatt's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Happy?" he asked, his fingers trailing through her hair. "Happier than I knew was possible." She tilted her head to look up at him. "Thank you for seeing me that day, for saving me. You saved me right back, sweetheart. Don't ever doubt that." The spring and summer of their first year of marriage passed in blissful contentment. They worked side by side during the day, tending the garden and the animals, maintaining the cabin and the land. At night, they made love and talked for hours, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal enthusiasm. By autumn, Ophelia suspected she was pregnant. When she was certain, she told Wyatt over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still, his eyes searching hers. "A baby? Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. I've missed my courses twice now, and I've been sick most mornings." Wyatt came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears streaming down his face. "A baby," he said again, wonder in his voice. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Ophelia asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I never thought I'd have this again, a family. You've given me everything, Ophelia." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Wyatt fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less. Ophelia protested but secretly loved his attention. They spent the long winter nights planning for the baby, discussing names and dreaming about the future. "What if it's a boy?" Wyatt asked one evening, his hand resting on Ophelia's swollen belly. "Then he'll be strong and kind like his father," she smiled at him, "and probably stubborn." Stubborn is your contribution, Wyatt teased. I'm perfectly reasonable, Ophelia laughed. Is that what you call it? The baby came in early May, almost exactly a year after their wedding. The birth was long and difficult, with only Wyatt to help since they were too far from town to fetch a doctor or midwife. But he stayed calm and steady, talking Ophelia through each contraction, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her how strong and brave she was. When the baby finally arrived with a lusty wail, Wyatt wrapped the tiny body in clean blankets and placed the child in Ophelia's arms. "A son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son." Ophelia looked down at the red, wrinkled face of her baby and felt her heart expand impossibly. He was perfect, from his tiny fingers to his shock of dark hair. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." They named him William, after Ophelia's father. Little Will was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had a set of lungs that could wake the dead when he wanted to eat. Wyatt was a devoted father, walking the floor with Will when he fussed, changing his nappies without complaint, staring at him for hours as if he couldn't quite believe this miracle. "I was afraid I'd forgotten how to do this," Wyatt confessed one night as he rocked Will to sleep. "It's been so long since Clara was small." "You're wonderful with him," Ophelia assured him. "A natural." Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. The cabin that had felt peaceful with just the two of them now rang with baby sounds, cries and coos and gurgles that filled Ophelia with joy. She loved watching Wyatt with their son, seeing the gentleness in his large hands as he held the tiny baby, hearing him sing off key lullabies. Will grew and thrived. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything. Wyatt baby proofed the cabin as best he could, but their son was adventurous and curious, always exploring. Ophelia spent her days chasing after him, while Wyatt laughed at the chaos their peaceful home had become. "This is what you wanted," she reminded him when Will managed to dump an entire bag of flour on the floor. "A family." "And I wouldn't change a thing," Wyatt said, scooping up his flour-covered son. "Not one single thing." When Will was 2, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born on a snowy December day, small and delicate where Will had been big and robust. They named her Rose, because Wyatt said she was as beautiful and sweet as the wild roses that grew by the creek. With 2 small children, life became busier but no less happy. Will was protective of his baby sister, bringing her his toys and patting her head gently. Wyatt built additions onto the cabin, creating more space for their growing family. Ophelia had never imagined she could be this content, this fulfilled. The years passed in a blur of children's laughter and quiet moments of love. Will grew into a strong, kind boy who loved the outdoors and learning from his father. Rose was gentle and thoughtful, always singing like her mother. When Rose was 3, another son arrived, Samuel, who had his mother's dark eyes and quick smile. Ophelia watched her children play in the yard one summer afternoon, Wyatt beside her on the porch. She was 30 now, he was 54, and they'd been married 12 years. It felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. "You ever regret it?" she asked him. "Buying me that day, the quiet life you gave up for this chaos." Wyatt pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Regret the best decision I ever made. Never. You and these children, you're my whole world, Ophelia. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You gave me mine," she said softly. "Everything good I have, everything I am, started the day you saw me and decided I was worth saving. You were always worth it, sweetheart. I just helped you see that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. Will was teaching Rose how to skip stones in the creek while Samuel toddled after them on chubby legs. It was an ordinary moment, nothing special or remarkable, but it was everything. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the children came running up to the porch, demanding supper and stories and attention. Wyatt and Ophelia looked at each other and smiled, that private smile of two people who have built something beautiful together. That night, after the children were asleep, they lay in bed talking quietly. Ophelia traced patterns on Wyatt's chest with her finger, thinking about the long road that had brought them here. "I used to wonder why things happened the way they did," she said. "Why my mother died, why my father married Margaret, why she sold me. It all seemed so cruel and senseless. And now I think maybe it was all leading me here to you and this life. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, but I can't regret the path that brought me to this moment." She looked up at him. "Does that make sense? Perfect sense." Wyatt kissed her softly. "We all have hard roads to walk. What matters is where we end up and who walks beside us." "Then I'm exactly where I want to be," Ophelia said with certainty. "With exactly who I want to be with." Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Will, at 16, was nearly as tall as his father and just as skilled in the wilderness. Rose, at 14, had her mother's grace and her father's steady nature. Samuel, at 11, was the wild child, always climbing trees and exploring, keeping his parents on their toes. The cabin had been expanded several times over the years, and now sprawled across the small valley. Wyatt had built a proper barn and workshop, while Ophelia had established extensive gardens that provided most of their food. They were largely self-sufficient, though they made trips to Wichita several times a year for supplies and to sell Wyatt's furs and Ophelia's preserves. On these trips, Ophelia sometimes thought about her stepmother but never sought her out. That part of her life was closed, forgiven but not forgotten. Once, in town, an older woman had approached her, and Ophelia realized with shock that it was Margaret. The woman looked old and worn, her face lined with bitterness. "Ophelia, I heard you married that mountain man." Margaret's voice held the same critical tone Ophelia remembered. "I did. 12 years ago now." Ophelia kept her voice neutral, feeling Wyatt's solid presence behind her. "Living out in the wild like savages, I suppose. You could have had a proper life if you'd been more agreeable." Ophelia looked at this woman who had caused her so much pain and felt nothing but pity. "I have a wonderful life, Margaret. A husband who loves me, 3 beautiful children, and a home filled with happiness. I hope you can say the same." Margaret's face twisted and she walked away without another word. Wyatt put his arm around Ophelia's shoulders. "You all right? I'm fine. She can't hurt me anymore." "She never could, really, not after you came along." Ophelia smiled up at her husband. "Let's go home." On Ophelia's 35th birthday, Wyatt surprised her with a trip, just the two of them. The children stayed with Tom and Sarah at the way station, excited for the adventure of being away from home. Wyatt took Ophelia to a place he'd discovered years ago, a hidden valley with hot springs where steam rose into the cool air. They spent 3 days there, just the two of them like in the early days of their marriage. They bathed in the warm springs, made love under the stars, and talked about everything and nothing. It was a gift, this time together, a reminder that they were still Wyatt and Ophelia, still lovers and best friends beneath the roles of parents. "Thank you for this," Ophelia said on their last night, nestled against Wyatt's side under a blanket. "I didn't realize how much I needed it until now. We've been so busy with the children and the homestead. I wanted to remind you that you're still my first priority," Wyatt said. "Still the girl I fell in love with, even though you're a woman now with children of your own." "I love you more now than I did then," Ophelia confessed. "I didn't think that was possible, but it's true." Every year with you makes my love deeper, stronger. Same here, sweetheart. You're still the best thing that ever happened to me." When they returned home, the children greeted them with hugs and stories about their adventures. The cabin felt even more welcoming after their time away, and Ophelia was struck again by how lucky she was to have this life, this family. Will left home when he was 19, heading west to seek his own fortune. It was hard to let him go, but both Wyatt and Ophelia understood the need for a young man to make his own way. He promised to write, and he did, sending letters about his adventures working on a cattle ranch in Wyoming. Eventually, he met a girl there and settled down, giving Wyatt and Ophelia their first grandchild when Will was just 22. Rose married at 18, a young man from Wichita named Thomas who was a blacksmith. They built a home near town but visited often, and Rose's laughter still filled the cabin during these visits. She had 2 daughters in quick succession, and Ophelia delighted in being a grandmother to these sweet girls. Samuel was the one who stayed. At 20, he announced that he wanted to build his own cabin on the property, expand the homestead, and continue the life his parents had built. Wyatt and Ophelia helped him construct a home just over the hill from theirs, close enough for comfort but far enough for privacy. Samuel married a schoolteacher named Anne, and they had 4 children who ran wild through the valley, keeping everyone young. Wyatt was in his 70s now, his hair white and his movements slower, but his mind was sharp and his love for Ophelia as strong as ever. She was in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful to Wyatt's eyes. They spent their days in gentle activity, tending a smaller garden, playing with grandchildren, and enjoying the peace they'd earned. One evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset as they'd done countless times before, Wyatt took Ophelia's hand. "Do you remember that day in Wichita, when I first saw you?" "I remember everything about that day. I was so scared. I knew the moment I saw you that you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how much." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me 33 years of happiness, Ophelia. 33 years I never expected to have." "And we have many more ahead of us," Ophelia said firmly, though she knew they were both getting older, that their time was precious. "However many we have, I'll treasure every moment." Wyatt smiled at her, that same warm smile that had melted her heart so many years ago. "I love you, Ophelia Zimmerman, more than words can say." "I love you too, Wyatt, always and forever." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Around them, the sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted on the evening breeze, mixed with the familiar sounds of the land they both loved. It was a perfect moment, a perfect life, built from the ashes of pain and loss into something beautiful and enduring. Ophelia thought back to that frightened 16-year-old girl on the auction block, unable to see any future beyond that moment of despair. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, that she would find love and happiness beyond her wildest dreams, would she believe it? Probably not. But it had all come true anyway, every wonderful moment of it. The years continued their steady march. Wyatt and Ophelia celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children's spouses, and a whole crowd of grandchildren. Samuel and Anne had organized the celebration, filling the main cabin with food and decorations. It was chaotic and loud and perfect. Will had come from Wyoming with his family, making the long journey to be there. Rose and her family came from Wichita. The valley was full of tents and laughter, 3 generations of a family that had started with 2 broken people finding each other. During the party, Rose gave a toast. "To my parents, who showed us all what real love looks like." You've built something amazing here, not just this homestead, but a family rooted in love and respect. Thank you for being the best examples we could have asked for." Everyone raised their glasses, and Wyatt pulled Ophelia close, kissing her soundly despite the cheers and teasing from their children and grandchildren. Ophelia laughed, her face flushed with happiness and embarrassment. Later, when things had quieted down and most people had gone to bed, Wyatt and Ophelia slipped away to their favorite spot by the creek. The moon was full, casting silver light over the water. 40 years, Wyatt mused. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I know exactly what you mean. Ophelia leaned against him. If someone had told me that day in Wichita, that 40 years later I'd be here with you, surrounded by all this love, I never would have believed them. Best $200 I ever spent, Wyatt joked, and Ophelia elbowed him gently. I'm worth more than $200. You're worth everything, he said seriously. Worth more than all the gold in California. You're my heart, Ophelia. You always have been. They stood by the creek for a long time, holding each other and watching the moonlight dance on the water. After all these years, they still found comfort in each other's arms, still found joy in these quiet moments together. Wyatt passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 78. He'd had a good day, playing with his great-grandchildren and working in the garden with Ophelia. They'd made love that night, slowly and tenderly, and he'd fallen asleep with Ophelia in his arms. When she woke in the morning, he was gone, a slight smile on his face as if he'd died dreaming of something beautiful. Ophelia grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They'd had 42 wonderful years together, more than many people got. She'd loved him with her whole heart, and he'd loved her the same way. There were no regrets, no words left unsaid, no love left unexpressed. She stayed in the cabin, unable to imagine living anywhere else. Samuel and Anne checked on her daily, and her grandchildren visited often, filling the space with life and noise. Ophelia spent her days tending her garden, writing letters to Will and Rose, and remembering. She pulled out old photographs and keepsakes, reliving the life she and Wyatt had built together. On what would have been their 45th anniversary, Ophelia walked to Wyatt's grave on the hill overlooking the valley. She'd planted wild roses there, and they bloomed profusely, their sweet scent filling the air. "Happy anniversary, my love," she said softly, sitting on the bench Samuel had built beside the grave. "I miss you every day, but I'm not sad. How can I be sad when you gave me such a beautiful life?" She told him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about Rose's latest letter and Will's upcoming visit. She talked to him like he was still there because, in a way, he was. He lived on in their children, in the homestead he'd built, in every happy memory she carried. Ophelia lived to be 72, active and sharp-minded until the end. She died in the cabin, surrounded by her children, peacefully slipping away as she napped in the rocking chair Wyatt had made for her decades earlier. Her last words were, "I'm coming, Wyatt," and she died with a smile on her face. They buried her next to Wyatt on the hill, the two of them together again under the wide Kansas sky. The family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations strong, all of them products of the love that Wyatt and Ophelia had shared. Samuel stood at his mother's grave and told the story one more time, the story everyone knew but never tired of hearing. "My father saved my mother from an auction block in Wichita when she was just 18 years old. He gave her safety and kindness when she'd known only cruelty. But she saved him right back, pulling him out of grief and giving him a reason to live again. Together they built this place, this family, this legacy of love. We're all here because 2 broken people found each other and became whole. That's what we need to remember, what we need to pass down to our children. Love heals. Love builds, love endures. The family stood together on the hill as the sun set over the valley, over the cabin and the creek, and the land that Wyatt and Ophelia had loved. Their story had ended, but the family they'd created carried on, generation after generation, all of them blessed by the love of a mountain man and the girl he'd saved, who had saved him right back. The cabin still stands in that valley, maintained by Samuel's descendants. The wild roses still bloom on the hill where Wyatt and Ophelia rest together. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, you can almost hear the echoes of laughter, of children playing, of two people who found love in the most unlikely place and made it last a lifetime. Their story became legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of how Wyatt Zimmerman saw a young woman on an auction block and recognized something in her that called to his heart. How Ophelia Harris found the courage to choose love over fear, to build a life with a man who saw her true worth. How together they created something that lasted far beyond their own lives. In later years, Will's granddaughter wrote a book about them, collecting all the stories and letters and memories. She called it The Mountain Man and His Bride, and it became a treasured family heirloom. In it, she wrote, "Love stories are common, but true love is rare." Wyatt and Ophelia Zimmerman had true love, the kind that transforms everything it touches. They showed us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to choose happiness, never too late to love and be loved in return. Their legacy isn't just the land they settled or the children they raised. It's the example they set of what two people can build when they commit to loving each other through everything life brings. The homestead prospered through the generations. Samuel's son expanded it further, adding more cabins as the family grew. They farmed and ranched, hunted and trapped, living close to the land as Wyatt had taught them. The valley became known as Zimmerman Hollow, and the family became pillars of the community, known for their fairness and kindness. Every year on the 1st of May, the anniversary of Wyatt and Ophelia's wedding, the family gathered at the homestead for a celebration. They shared a meal, told the old stories, and visited the graves on the hill. The youngest children would ask questions about the great-great-grandparents they'd never met, and the older generation would answer, keeping the memories alive. "Did they really love each other that much?" a child asked once. "More," answered her grandmother, one of Rose's daughters. More than any story could capture. You could see it in how they looked at each other, how they moved together like two parts of one whole. I was just a girl when Grandma Ophelia died, but I remember watching them together and thinking that was what I wanted when I grew up. That kind of love that makes you better, that brings out the best in you. "Did you find it?" "I did," she said, smiling at her husband of 40 years. "Because they showed me what to look for, what real love looks like. That's the gift they gave all of us." The land itself seemed to hold their memory. Deer still drank from the creek where Wyatt had taught Ophelia to fish. Wild roses still bloomed in the meadow where they'd walked hand in hand. The cabin, expanded and updated over the years, still held the original fireplace where they'd sat on cold winter nights, planning their future. In the bedroom, now used by the current generation, you could still see the W+O carved into the windowsill, Wyatt's handiwork from their first year of marriage. In the barn, his old tools hung on the wall, still functional after all these years. In the kitchen, Ophelia's recipe book sat on a shelf, its pages yellowed and stained, filled with her neat handwriting and notes in the margins. These physical remnants were precious, but the real legacy was intangible. It was in how the family treated each other with respect and kindness. It was in how they faced hardship with courage and hope. It was in how they loved freely and completely, without holding back. All of these traits could be traced back to Wyatt and Ophelia, to the example they set, and the values they instilled in their children. As decades passed and the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the story remained relevant. New generations found inspiration in it, found hope that they too could overcome difficult beginnings and build beautiful lives. The auction block that had seemed like the end of Ophelia's story had instead been the beginning of her greatest adventure. On the hill where they rested, the roses grew thick and wild, tended by loving hands generation after generation. Two simple headstones marked the graves with matching inscriptions that Samuel had chosen. Wyatt Zimmerman, 1830–1908. Beloved husband, father, and friend. He saw worth where others saw none. Ophelia Zimmerman, 1854–1926. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She turned pain into purpose and fear into love. Between the two headstones, carved into a flat stone, were the words, "Together forever, as it always should be." The sun set over Zimmerman Hollow as it had done thousands of times before, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. The current residents of the homestead, Samuel's great-great-grandchildren, sat on the porch with their own children, watching the day end. They spoke of ordinary things, plans for tomorrow and repairs that needed doing, the comfortable talk of people who belonged to the land and to each other. But in the spaces between words, in the love that flowed between family members, in the very air of the valley itself, Wyatt and Ophelia's presence could still be felt. Their love story had ended long ago, but what they built together lived on, vital and strong, a testament to the power of two people choosing to love each other against all odds. And as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, it was easy to imagine two figures walking hand in hand through the meadow, a tall man and a slender woman, forever young, forever in love, forever home in the place they had made together in the wild Kansas hills. Their story was finished, complete, with no loose ends or unanswered questions. They had lived fully, loved completely, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations to come. It was, in every way, a happy ending.